Ghost of Yōtei is a story about revenge, plain and simple. They tried, and for all intents and purposes, succeeded in taking the tried and tested formula from Ghost of Tsushima, distilling some of its best elements, adding a few new to the mix, and ended up with this next banger of an installment in the series. In this video, I'm going to be talking about what's new to the combat, how they tie it into the new game, but also why I think it still works so well. Mostly. Hey, what's up? How you doing? Welcome back to my channel. If it's your first time here, welcome, and if it isn't, glad to have you back. So, without further ado, let's talk about it. Love you all. One thing we can all agree on is the visuals of the Ghost games are always going to be next level, and fully harnessing the power of the PS5 and PS5 Pro, Ghost of Yotei is nothing short of gorgeous. But one thing that isn't always a sure win, especially when it comes to sequels, is how changes are going to be received, big or small. Even when you have a winning formula, the smallest change can make or break tried and true systems. So, what do? Leave things as they are, change a little here and there, overhaul the whole system, or find a middle ground that works? Not for everybody, but almost everybody. The team behind Ghost of Yotei really tried to combine what was loved about the old title and, moving forward with the times, both from a player and a narrative perspective with when the game is set, made some interesting decisions with where they took this one. And whether that helps or hurts the title in the long run, well, that's yet to be seen. Set a good number of years after Ghost of Tsushima, Ghost of Yotei is your good, old-fashioned revenge story, with you taking on the role of Atsu, a surviving member of her family who were brutally attacked by a vengeful lord and his gang called the Yotei 6, with events in the game taking place years after the tragic night of the attack, all triggered by Atsu finally coming back home after years of being a mercenary, also known as a Ronin, on the mainland. Right off the bat, we're told two key things of what to expect. One, since you're a Ronin, you're not constantly forced to choose whether or not to play by a strict samurai code, which is one of the more divisive elements of the first game. And two, there are more weapons at your disposal. Both of these things were properly used by the Sucker Punch team to basically deliver an experience that keeps you engaged for the long haul. But how exactly did they manage to tie all this in? Starting right off the bat, it was the addition of the new melee weapons. As you progress through the land of Etzo, you come across and hear about various masters scattered throughout the land. Encountering them starts you off on usually pretty short missions that will eventually have you acquiring that weapon. Further exploration and usually one or two more missions in your journey will allow you to develop and eventually master each weapon, letting you have much more flexibility in strength, speed, reach, crowd control, and area damage with your attacks during encounters. Therefore, the game does recommend specific weapons against other weapon types, especially if you want an easier time of it, against every encounter being a brutal slogfest, which I will sometimes admit can be satisfying in its own right, not gonna lie. While I found this mechanic to be pretty straightforward, replacing the stance mechanic from Ghost of Tsushima, enemy encounters later in the game become much tougher as you constantly have to juggle through weapons as the enemies around you keep shuffling among themselves, if not outright switching their weapons to try and catch you unawares. Ironically, this is also where my first gripe with the combat in the game comes through, the alignment mechanic. Sometimes it feels a little bit too strict. Now, while you can use whatever weapon you want for shits and gigs or just for aura farming, the game does from time to time prod you to switch weapons if you happen to be taking too long to defeat an enemy using the wrong weapon. And where this isn't outright annoying in its own right, you do sometimes feel like a fight is artificially taking just a little bit longer than it should just because of your weapon choice. One of the strongest traits of the combat, and hell, pretty much the whole game, is just how fluid you're able to be in encounters, picking and choosing different strategies, finding perfect parry windows, capitalizing on openings in your opponent's defenses, same way they capitalize on moments where you fuck up. Them trying to force you to use a specific weapon based solely on what your opponent or opponents are using feels kind of counterintuitive to this. Worse still, because in the beginning you essentially have to fight everyone with just your katana, and you manage to get by despite what your enemies are using because you don't have any other choice. And you won't get some of these weapons until much later in the game, and even then you don't have to get the weapons. That's right, most of them are actually optional side quests. If you're feeling particularly masochistic and don't want them, you don't have to go and get them, which is why at some point it just starts to feel like the game is intentionally forcing you to play with the whole switching mechanic just because it's there. It feels like some mixed signals are being sent in there somewhere, but maybe that's just me. Next up, and probably one of the more useful mechanics added, but also one of the less sexy in terms of what you can actually do with it, is the ability to now pick up and throw items and weapons dropped in the battlefield, and during encounters. Remember that for later, because there's a cheeky little way to use this to your advantage during boss fights that I'll show you when discussing one of the other mechanics. That's a right bastard to use in a fight, but that's essentially it. You're able to pick up and use items to disrupt the flow of combat if it isn't going in your favor and maybe just need to create some breathing room, or when you just want to quickly dispatch an enemy who's a little out of range and being a pain in the ass. In the beginning, beginning, I didn't use this all that much, but I did come to quickly realize in some instances, this ability can be a little overpowered, given things like the uncanny aim you can do with a quick throw, and with just the sheer range you're able to throw some of these things. Jeez, man. Granted, if anything blocks the target, allies included, the throw misses and the weapon can't be thrown again. But in the right circumstances, man, this skill can be amazingly useful if you just go into straight combat and just want to sweep through a camp, even at the higher difficulties. And if you feel like being a right bastard, you can use it to really turn a fight when paired with a disarm mechanic. That's right, disarm mechanic. Now this one I like. Pretty early on, you learn real quick that you can get disarmed in a fight. Yep, you can get disarmed, leaving you scrambling around while whoever disarmed you goes pure aggro and throws everything they can at you. Now, while you can counter this with a perfectly timed attack of your own, sometimes it can be a right bastard to get the timing right, especially later on in the game when these attacks come at you real quick and are harder to predict. But luckily, pretty early on, you also learn how to pull this off, and boy oh boy, is it an absolute game changer. It's both super useful for allowing you to temporarily, and most times permanently, take an enemy out of the equation, either by outright dismemberment or by forcing them to drop their weapon that you can then sometimes lovingly return to them. Now this is where this skill combo comes in handy during boss encounters. How? Well, like a lot of the enemies you come across in the game, bosses sometimes also switch between multiple weapons. Remember what I said about the game forcing you to use the switch mechanic? Well, turns out for some of them, the other weapons are a secondary weapon, which means that every once in a while, you're able to disarm them, and then like a normal enemy, pick up the weapon and throw it at them or away, effectively taking that weapon and that moveset away from them. Oh man, is this a hell of a way to level the playing field, especially if you're like me and sometimes find yourself facing off against someone you shouldn't be because you were in an area that you most definitely had no business being in yet. I want more games to do things like this. It adds to the realism and immersion of encounters so well and actually makes you fight with your head and not just mash attack and block buttons hoping to find parries and weaknesses. Make the weaknesses. Rounding up this list, I couldn't not talk about the additional quickfire weapons added to your arsenal, could I? Like the stance mechanic, you've been given a bunch of new quickfire weapons to aid you and spice up the combat a bit. The list includes the old trusty kunai and smoke bombs from the first game for getting out of and sometimes into sticky situations, the Metsubushi, which is a debilitating powder attack Atsu uses to blind and slow enemies in front of her, the Oni Flame, which, as the name implies, is used to set your current weapon on fire for additional damage and to set enemies on fire, 2 additional bomb types on top of the smoke bomb from the first game, you get a blinding bomb and a concussive bomb, both useful for crowd control and dealing massive area damage when groups of enemies are bunched together, and last but certainly not least, a quick-fire single-shot weapon called the Tanzatsu that's hella useful for doing quick bursts of damage or cutting short enemy attacks just at the right moment. These tools, like the main weapons, become available gradually on your journey, unlocked through a combination of progression through main and side quests, and I found each and every one of them to be extremely useful when used right and not just extra fluff to pad out the game. Each tool has 2 upgrade paths, one for additional ammo and the other for enhancing the tool's base effect, so think stuff like damage, the stagger duration, the number of enemies affected, and so on. This allows you to focus on those that you find the most useful for your playstyle, but again, if you're like me and you end up side questing quite a bit, you'll find that you're able to upgrade most of these pretty regularly throughout the game, except when it actually throws natural barriers to slow your progress, like having a resource that you need like gunpowder not being available in your current area at all, or in very limited quantities, which I guess is one way of them stopping you from becoming overpowered way too early, and understandably so, because the challenge in this game, the challenge in the combat in this game, is where the most fun with this title is to be had, and I think that's one of the most important aspects that the dev team focused on this one. And the attention to detail in and out of the combat is just insane. From tiny little details like how Atsu unsheathes the different weapons and how the equipped armor moves so fluidly with her, to bigger things like them maintaining the same motion capture team to capture the tension Ryu fighting style adapted in the game to show off the brutal variety and effectiveness of each of the weapons in your arsenal. Details like how she actually reacts in real time when you cancel one of your attacks mid-swing to awkwardly parry an attack, showing that yes, she is a woman fighting big dudes and has to work that much harder to cut through an armored body. And of course, my all-time favorite, the dedicated sheath button and the different animations that make you feel like an absolute badass after an encounter. And trust me, this game has no shortage of encounters to keep you engaged. From start to finish, it's almost like a Japanese Red Dead 2. It's just that immersive sometimes. And Sucker Punch worked hard on this, and I'm so glad they did. When you're tying the new with the old from Ghost of Tsushima, it's just a really well-balanced game in my books. So, where does that leave us as players in the next chapter of the Ghost games? Is the combat any good? Yes. Yes, it is. Did they successfully manage to build off the foundations of the last game? Yes, they also absolutely did. Did they do everything right in this game? Well, it's a bit subjective overall, I'd say. Everyone will find something they don't like about this game. For me, it's the awkward feel of the climbing and parkour mechanics that always felt a bit out of place in the last game, and that still kind of feels a little bit weird in this game. But granted, there's thankfully a lot less of that in this title, and some added variety so they don't all feel the same by the time you're in the second chapter of the game. So yeah, they managed to make a damn good sequel here. I have some friends who have recently picked up Ghost of Tsushima and are head over heels in love with it, the same way I was all those years ago, and I'm genuinely excited for them to have a run at this title with Tsushima still so fresh in their minds, just to get a gauge of where this lands for them as well, compared to the rest of us who have had quite a wait between the two titles. And you too, I'm curious about how this game has been received. Given all the negative press around Sony and the gaming industry in general lately, are you going to be picking this up? Did you have plans to pick it up on PC before that was grabbed by Sony, effectively turning this into a PS5 and PS5 Pro exclusive? Let's keep the conversation going down below. It helps me plan future videos, and hell, any excuse to talk about video games is really all I need. In the meantime, I'm off to take a look at the new Legends mode that just dropped a little while ago. Until the next one, thanks for watching. Peace.